Ladies and gentlemen, and very warm welcome to the second meeting of the Referendum Scotland Bill Committee in 2013. First of all, in opening, we can just make sure everybody's mobile phones are switched off, and we've got a good audience today, so can I just ask you two to also make sure that your mobile phones are switched off. That will help our proceedings. Apologies have been received from Patricia Ferguson and Stuart Maxwell, and Richard Baker and Bill Kidd, respectively, are attending as substitutes in their place. We've also had an apology from Tavish Scott, and the alternative, the substitute, Willie Rennie, unfortunately is not available. But welcome, Richard, to the committee. I'm sure you'll enjoy the proceedings when you're here.
Thank you.
And that takes me to the second item on the agenda, sorry, the first item on the agenda, which is the Declaration of Interests. And Richard, have you got any declarations you'd like to make?
I'm a director of Better Together.
Okay, thank you very much for putting it on the record. That's us on to agenda item 2, and a very warm welcome to the Scottish Parliament to Brian Byrne and Joan Houghton, who are both involved with the Scottish Assessors Association. I'm very grateful for you coming along today, being prepared to take questions from the Referendum Bill Committee. I've already established with you that you don't want to make any opening statement, so I think we'll just get straight on to questions, but a very warm welcome to you. And I'm going to ask James if he would kick off the question session.
Okay, thank you, Convener, and thanks for coming in this morning and being prepared to share your expertise with us. I've just got a couple of questions around the annual canvass. First of all, just to be clear, what is the timetable for the next annual canvass, just in terms of when it starts, when it finishes, and how that would impact on a 2014 referendum?
Oh. That's one of the issues. We don't know exactly when the timetable is. The start of the canvass could be any time between October and December, or even into January. It depends on the individual registration, which is coming in 2014, and the canvass is almost certainly going to be delayed.
Right.
Okay, but it's not clear exactly when it's delayed to.
Okay, so just to be clear, am I right in saying that there's normally an annual canvass?
Normally an annual canvass which would start probably September and finish by the 1st of December.
So that would be the normal process, but
yes.
What you're saying is that because of the referendum in 2014...
No, not because of the referendum, sorry, because of individual electoral registration.
Maybe you could explain a bit more.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
right.
I think it's needed.
Could maybe explain what that means, actually? I think it would be helpful.
Okay, individual electoral registration is going through UK Parliament at the moment, and the idea is that each person will be responsible for registering themselves rather than using the household system as we have at the moment. And as part of that process, there will be a data matching exercise carried out possibly from July 14. And in order to get that data matching to be as good as possible, the canvass is likely to be delayed. And the draft legislation suggests it will be 1st of December. However, there are various suggestions going around to bring that slightly back.
Okay, right, so just to be clear, the normal process is that there would be an annual canvass starting in September, but because of legislation going through the UK Parliament, which involves this new process of data matching, individual EROs are awaiting the impact of that, and because of that, they're not exactly clear yet as to when the start date might be.
Not clear yet. It should be clear by March when the start date will be.
Right, by March. And the canvass normally takes, am I right in saying 3 months, is that correct?
Yep.
Yes, well, I think it varies across Scotland depending on the kind of geographical layout of any particular area. Sometimes some people start particularly early because they're in a rural area and they've got further to go to carry out their canvass. Generally, the tighter the area, the shorter the time period we carry out a canvass. So you will find out that some people might start at the very beginning of August, some people start nearer the beginning of September. But generally, it is somewhere between August and September, and it must be concluded and the register printed by the 1st of December. So every canvass will conclude generally a week to a fortnight before the 1st of December, the actual process of carrying out the canvass.
Right, now, if a canvass was delayed in an area, or the commencement of a canvass was delayed in an area until the 1st of December, what impact would that have for the electoral arrangements for a referendum poll in autumn 2014, particularly bearing in mind new arrangements to involve 16 and 17-year-olds?
It's actually quite useful for that, because the qualifying date to be on the register depends on the 1st of December. It's just coincidentally, that's the same date as the publication date, but it remains 1st of December no matter when you publish the register. So if you carry out a canvass after 1st of December, you automatically capture more 17-year-olds than you would have.
Okay. And then in terms of obviously you've got preparations in relation to the new legislation coming from the UK. There's legislation which is about to be considered here, which we hope would be completed by the end of June. At this point in time, have EROs had any guidelines, or have they done any preparations for the legislation which will progress through this Parliament in relation to 16 and 17-year-olds?
Yes, we've been discussing things with Scottish Government officials about various ways of capturing, well, it could, depending on the date of the start of the canvass, it could be 14-year-olds, a few 14-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds. If the canvass is delayed to after December, there's less problem with 16 and 17 because they're part of a normal canvass by then. So it really be a method of capturing the 15-year-olds. And the suggestion seemed to be that there'll be a separate, excuse me, separate canvass form for 15-year-olds.
One final question from me, Convener. Just in terms of resources for all this, what strikes me is that you've got new arrangements coming down the line from both parliaments. Has there been any assessment of additional resources that may be required for the canvass?
I think we've obviously looked at how the two different pieces of legislation are going to align, and I think that will actually dictate a lot of the costs as to when we start and when we stop each of the procedures and how they actually manage to go in tandem. And one of the considerations is to use the canvass itself to send out forms to all households to collect young persons' information. Now, I think that's on the basis that if you send it out, the form with the household canvass, there's less cost because it's already in an envelope with another form. However, you're only trying to tackle 1% of the population, so only 1% of the households is likely to give a return on this. So it's weighing up that, and we won't really be able to estimate costs until we know the final details of it. And I think that's at the canvass. So you're talking about doing the canvass probably late 2013, early 2014. After that, I think probably what we would be trying to do would be to target schools to try and find out, because if you're looking at 14, 15-year-olds, they've got to be in education. So I think one of the key ways would be to try and approach schools with a view to trying to get the school pupils actually registering probably at the schools, although they've got to be resident at, they will be registered at their home address, but the easiest way is to get them through the education authorities. I think the next stage is then coming in, if individual electoral registration comes in the 1st of July 2014, that becomes a third step in the process. And I think we've having discussed with the Scottish Government, they're really looking at not having those young people having to go through the matching exercise that the rest of the country will have to go through. So I think there'll be different ways, and it's whether the individual registration will be actually delayed to allow the referendum to take place. I think it all depends when the referendum date is set as to what the UK Government might allow us to do with delaying the onset of the IER. So the costs can vary depending on what we can do, how much flexibility we have.
Yeah, I've got a number of people who've indicated they want to come in, but can I just make sure, first of all, this is going to be supplementary. Rob, is yours a supplementary to what's been going on, or you want to come back in later?
It's supplementary in the sense about the accuracy of what is actually captured at the present time.
Okay, well, I'll take you next when you go.
Okay. You know, you create the register. It's updated every month or so. How accurate do you think the register is on the electorate that we have at the present time?
Overall, if you look at the population estimates, which are reasonably reliable but not perfect, and you look at the overall electorate, it's something like 93%. But there will be duplicates, there will be people missing, and there's swings and roundabouts involved in that. But we feel that the electoral register is in the 90s for completeness. Accuracy is a slightly different question, because if somebody moves and it takes time to catch up with their move, they're still on the register but not at the right place. But that's partly to do with the fact that the register is still an annual register and people can move within the year, and the idea of the canvass is to catch up with them. So the register loses, I think from Electoral Commission research, the register loses about 1% throughout the year and then catches up again at the canvass.
Convener, for what you know of the canvass procedures and so on, do you expect to be able to capture in the the mid-90s the 16 and 17-year-olds who could vote?
15, 16-year-olds are probably... Young people are mobile, like 18, 19, 20s are very mobile, but they're not so mobile at 15 and 16. We know where they are, we can use school records. In Scotland, we have good access to school records. That's a problem in some parts of England with the dual-tier councils, but we have no issue with that. So we're pretty confident we will have good information where the 16-year-olds are. And that's one reason why there's, as Joan mentioned, there might be an option to target forms because we know where they are, rather than a blanket coverage to try and cover every house, because there's something like 45,000 people you're trying to get out of 4 million electors.
Okay, Bill Kidd.
Pardon me. Thank you very much for the information that you've given so far. Earlier, when you were speaking, I think, Brian, you mentioned registration would be done in a different format, unless I picked you up wrong. It wouldn't be done in households in the same manner as it normally is that?
The idea is by 2015, each individual will have been verified against another database, DWP, Department of Work and Pensions database. And we'll, as a first stage of that, we'll be matching the current register at the time, which will be around about July 14, against the DWP database. Anybody who matches on that will be confirmed as registered. Anybody who doesn't match on that will have to go through invitations and applications to get more information, get them confirmed again, and keep going until we get everybody individually matched or registered. And so it's a different process from the moment where we send out a form and anyone in the household can return that form to give us the detail. And if there's anybody new on that form, that becomes an application to register. So the form will no longer be that, it will just be an information form that will lead us to think there is somebody new there. We then send out an application. So
does that mean then that it's more on the individual to ensure the registration in an American-style way than it is at the present moment?
There are suggestions for civil penalties for not responding, so it's not entirely voluntary, but it is more on the individual to take part.
Sure. And in terms of the 14 and 15, the small number of 14-year-olds, but the 14 and 15-year-old attainers who are to be ascertained for registration, would you be looking at the councils to ensure that they were registered from the school, the local authority, to ensure that?
Well, what we do at the moment with 16-year-olds is we get information from the schools. Different EROs use it in different ways. Some will use it directly and contact the people, basically saying these are the names of people in the house. confirm that, and if it's confirmed, that's fine. If it's not confirmed, we'll have to use some other process to follow up on it. Others will do something slightly different and do it the other way around, but still using school records to check up where they feel somebody is missing from a form and follow up. Right, but the access to school records is very good, and we expect to be able to do that similar way with the 14 and 15-year-olds.
I think the key point is we can't put people on the register unless they apply to go on the register. So we must have a returned form. At the present moment in time, a canvass form during the canvass can register a whole household. Out with the canvass, it has to be an individual form at the present moment in time. When we come to the new system, it has to be an individual form from everybody.
Thank you very much.
Can I just tease that one a bit more? Because I thought that EROs had a general power to keep the register maintained, and as such, you can then approach those using powers you have to get the information you require. So it's not all just about one way about the individual in these circumstances registering. You've also got a requirement to maintain the register.
Before about 2001, we had a duty to put people on the register if we felt that the qualified were eligible and were resident. That changed in 2001 to become an application process. So during the year, it's an application form. If you've moved in to an area, you apply to go on the register, and we use council tax records, whatever, to identify people who have moved in and then send them an application form. But they still have to fill it in. At the canvass, if the canvass has anyone new on the form, that's deemed to be an application, and that's how they go into the register. So it's different from the way it was before 2001. Everything is an application.
Richard.
Just so I can be clear on that point, I remember that in 97, for example, there were big campaigns to get whole university lists just, submitted to register en masse. That was it, and they registered. There was no need for individual application. So, but now you can't have block registration in that same sense. Then.
In some circumstances, we can still use university lists if it's the halls of residence. We can treat that as a household and put people on the register from that at the canvass. But during individual registration, when it comes in, that won't be possible. That will just be information for us.
Well, now, but won't be by the time of the referendum.
It's possible now in certain circumstances. But
so, yeah. Likewise, schools can't just give you a list and you put these.
A boarding school could. We could use that.
But not a.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not going to class divide on that. And then I suppose my final question then would be: so at the moment, parents can put children on the register. Is that still the case of 14, 15-year-olds in this new application, or they will still, each of them will have to apply individually? The parents can't do it for them.
I understand the idea is that there will be a similar form to the canvass form that the parents could fill in, or anyone in the household could fill in, to say these people are 16.
They'll do that then?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I will.
Good morning. Can I just turn this round the other way, because I don't think I'm alone in being in a slight fog about the timescale for all this. Now, by turning it round the other way, let's assume, we don't know the date of the referendum, but let's assume a notional date of 31st October 2014. How soon before that, in an ideal world, and we maybe should just for the moment park the Electoral Registration Administration Bill, we'll come back to it, but how soon before, let us say, the 31st of October 2014, would you want a finalised register?
Well, the final register for the referendum is probably 11 days before the referendum.
How many?
11 days.
Okay.
That's normal for an election, but longer period would be preferable because it is quite tight.
And to get to that point, how soon before then would you be seeking information from voters?
Well, ideally, we would seek the information during the canvass time, which will be end of 2013, because 90% of people who get onto the register at canvass. So 90% of any group.
So, end of 13, going back to James Kelly's original question, there's going to be some procedure taking place to canvass.
Yes.
Who should be on that register?
Yes, and,
Okay.
and for anybody who's already 16 by then, assuming it's after the 1st of December, anyone who's already 16 can be added to the register as an attainer, they're gone with their date of birth.
Right.
Okay, anybody who's only 15 at that point would have to go into a different system, which would be a young
Right.
person's register. Now, the difference with that is, because it's not been published at the normal publication date, we'll get a little longer to catch up on anybody who's missing.
Okay. So just to get a rough shape round this, canvass process end of 2013 to prepare something, and that becomes basically the genesis of what will be the voting basis for a notional referendum on 31st October 2014. Now, if we overlay the Electoral Registration and Administration Bill, which I understand, I mean, do we know when that's coming into effect?
The proposal at the moment is 1st of July. There are suggestions that I understand that there's discussions in the background about whether there should be a delay to that in Scotland, but I don't know whether there will be a delay or not.
So we don't have a date set for the actual implement, other than it's probably July 2014.
Yes.
Probably July 2014. Convener, I think it might be helpful if you, if the committee is agreeable, wrote to the UK government and sought clarification on this.
I scribbled down myself. We need some briefing, whether it's the UK government or the Scottish government we asked to do it, because obviously there's a job to be done in bringing together the information where the UK is, together where the EROs in Scotland are. So I think a general briefing from the Scottish government, pulling these two bits together, would be very helpful.
Yes. And may I just have a final question?
Yeah, sure, on you go.
If we overlay this new bill, okay, and if we anticipate it's coming into effect in July 2014, that seems to me a colossal amount of work to be accomplished in Scotland.
It's not so much, there's a colossal amount of work, but it's also a potential for confusing some of the electors. That two totally separate things are happening at the same time. The individual registration and creating a register for the referendum on two different sets of rules.
Yes.
So,
I mean, it's maybe unfair to ask you this, and if you don't feel able to answer the question, I quite understand it, but if we take an implement date for a major piece of legislation affecting franchise of July 2014, and a very important constitutional referendum, which we think is somewhere end of October, beginning of November 2014, I mean, physically, can that amount of additional work be accomplished?
it would be preferable, from our point of view, if the implementation of individual registration was delayed in Scotland until after the referendum, but that might depend on a relatively early date for the referendum.
It could also be that if IER was brought in earlier in Scotland, it gives you another opportunity to send another batch of forms out, with a view to increasing again the electorate at that point in time. So I think that the difficulty will be having a gap in the middle of the IER process. It starts at 1st of July and it completes by the 1st of December at the present open time under the draft regulations or the draft legislation. And the difficulty is stopping in the middle to prepare for a 6-week period for the referendum.
Presumably it would be very challenging to get that brought in sooner. Because that's a UK responsibility.
The problem with bringing it in sooner is the European elections in June. So there's a very small window to bring it sooner.
They're talking about the European elections being in May, bringing it forward to the end of May. So if the European elections come forward to the end of May, then it does give a bit of scope to come a bit earlier.
We do have a suggestion that we take some evidence, an informal briefing from government officials on the 28th of February. It might be a chance to alert them to this issue in particular, coming to tell us a bit more about this particular, and so they can involve themselves in a discussion with the UK government before they come to talk to us about how this can be best managed. I think that's probably a good way through this. Yep. That takes us to Annabel Ewing.
Thank you. I mean, I was going to say it's going back to the issue of the attainers, but I mean, it also is relevant to the discussion we've just had about timing and so on. And that is to say, in terms of your earlier remarks, the kind of suggested timetable would be the canvass towards the end of 2013, perhaps into early 2014, and then you might feel it necessary to go to schools to see what further work could be done. And I just wonder to what extent it might be helpful if there was, in advance of all this, an information campaign with the schools, simply on the neutral issue of registration, to ensure that these eligible voters for the referendum were aware of what they would be required to do, and that hopefully would perhaps save some time at your end and would allow you to turn your attention perhaps to some of these other matters that are coming up.
Yes, I think you're right. I think we would almost certainly start to contact education authorities and get names and addresses. To go on the electoral register, you need to have the name, the address, obviously, date of birth, nationality. Now, I'm not sure that all schools will have that information, but whatever information we can get from the schools allows us to pre-populate a form. And what we find is if we send out a form which is pre-populated with the name, then we're more likely to get it back. If we send out a blank form, you're less likely to get it back. So it is a good idea to tackle schools first, then we do the canvass with pre-populated where we can, and then with non-returns, instead of chasing households where there's very unlikely to have any young persons in it, we then maybe more approach it on an individual basis through the schools, etc. I think there's various different steps we could go through.
Pre-population forms also leads to electronic returns. People can check the form and go online and say, that's correct. And that gets rid of a lot of paperwork.
Would perhaps be something that would be very interesting to younger people.
Yes.
Who communicate solely, I think, now on that sort of basis.
Okay, anybody else in that particular area? Patrick, you want to cover this area? You want to move on to a new
area? Yeah.
Okay, on you go, Patrick.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I'm just wondering whether there is any scope for the registration process and the Electoral Commission, who have a responsibility to promote participation, to coordinate in some way so that these issues about awareness, not only in schools but also colleges and universities, because 16, 17, 18, 19, you'll have a range of different people in different institutions. Awareness of registration and participation could be, the two could be benefited by a bit of coordination. Is that something that you're talking to the Commission about?
Yeah, the Commission quite regularly run campaigns, and we try to coordinate local campaigns with what the Commission are doing. And I think for this, it's very important that there is a major campaign by the Electoral Commission to raise awareness of it, and that would then tie in with when we issue forms and how we issue forms.
And one of the areas where there could be complexity, Richard Baker earlier mentioned universities and kind of drives to get university students to register, and I think the political parties will all recognise, from our experience, that sometimes you're trying to get people onto the register for the first time when they're new students at universities. But now we'd be talking about a situation where a great many of them, hopefully, would already have been registered. So you'll have people have been registered at their parents' home, and then they might move away to university or college, and they have to make a decision about whether they re-register at their new address or whether they stay registered. Is that an additional area of complexity? Is there a danger of losing people between the cracks when they move from the home into college or university and then into other areas of life?
The danger is that if you look at Electoral Commission research, the major group that's hardest to get on the register are young mobile people, and that's almost the definition of a student. So they're very difficult to tie down. If you get them on the register, then they move. You have to go through the whole process again. And with getting young people on for the referendum, unfortunately, because of the individual registration coming in, we'd have to go through the whole process again. We've raised this with the Cabinet Office, whether if we get somebody on the run, young person's register based on good, robust information from education departments, that will help with individual registration rather than relying on Department of Work and Pensions. So I understand they're considering it. So that might help to bridge the gap.
So that information would be coming from from education departments in local authorities, also from colleges and universities?
We would be able to get... Electoral registration officers have got wide powers of asking for information from virtually anybody, but especially your local council. So that covers the education. Universities are usually very helpful in providing lists of students where they provide the accommodation. It's more difficult when a student is in a private accommodation.
A great many.
It's a great many, especially slightly older ones.
Okay, thank you.
I don't want to lose what we just agreed, so can I just encapsulate where we are in terms of the issue of the canvass and the register, so it's quite clear for the clerks and what's to be achieved. But first of all, let me point colleagues to page 7 of the annex, which came to Annex A, which came to for the letter to myself as convener from the Cabinet Secretary on the 14th of December, where it touches on some of these issues in regard to the individual registration issue at the UK level, and then goes on to say we're currently considering whether these arrangements should apply to under-16s registering to vote in the referendum as well, and how best to approach this. At the UK and the Scottish Governments will work together to coordinate interaction, etc. I think that would be a good point for us to understand what discussions are going on between the Scottish Government and the UK Government, which will help not just us as a committee in consideration of the bill, but I'm sure will help our colleagues in the ERO world. So I think when the officials come to informally brief us on the 28th, where they should come at them to discuss that particular bit a bit further. Does that capture where we've got to so far? Then I think I'm not sure if we've finished that area of questioning, but we've got Stuart. And is that supplementary to that? Yes. You're supplementary as well, Stuart. Well, I'll take Stuart first then, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Just following on from the questions from my colleague Annabel Ewing, obviously the referendum is going to be the most important vote in Scotland for 300 years, but every election is certainly very important. And with the bill going through the UK Parliament, one of the issues that has been brought to my attention in the past is that somebody might fill out the form to register to vote, and then when they get to actually go to vote, their name's actually not on the register, although they've actually filled the form out and sent it away. And it's been brought to my attention a few times in recent years. Now, one of the things that I don't know if there's any thought that's been given to, certainly with the new process that's to come in, that if there is some type of notification to come back from the valuation board to the individual, because it's an individual registration process now in the future.
Part of the individual process would be that the ERO writes to a person to say you are on the register, or writes and says you're not in the register, fill in this form.
Text, or I mean, it could be via email or text, or if it's a letter.
We have suggested using electronic methods, but that's a slight struggle at the moment.
It's, obviously, Annabel mentioned the point regarding obviously the younger voters, 15, 16 and 17-year-olds, with the increased use of modern technology, and my text messages, I would say, are probably not modern now, but certainly to use that certainly as a tool, certainly for younger people, but for older people who maybe haven't registered before, or because of the new system there might be an element of confusion, so they don't know if they actually are going to be on the register or not. It might be better to write up in some form.
So as part of the individual registration, there will be a government digital service which people can use to register. They can go online, give the details, date of birth, national insurance number, and that information goes to the ERO and goes to the Department of Work and Pensions, and that's matched or not matched and goes back to the ERO. So people can do that online and they'll get a response. Hopefully they'll get a response electronically.
What happens if there are some people out there who actually don't have access to a computer, they've got absolutely no intention of having access to a computer, what about them?
Well, at the moment EROs use as many methods as possible of communicating with people. In my area we have a response of about 40% are electronic, either phone, text or internet, or a few emails. So it's about 40%, and it's growing. Different EROs are at different stages in that. Some are ahead of us, some behind us, but it's growing. Where we use electronic methods of communicating with people, people seem to respond to it and seem to like it. But there will always be people who rely on the post.
Just the point I'm trying to get across is that when it comes to the referendum, I would hate for there to be a situation anywhere in the country that somebody says that they filled out the form, they sent it away, and when they go to vote, their name's not on the register for them to vote because they haven't been informed that they actually that their application form or whatever didn't get there, or it's got lost or whatever.
We are considering that for the young voters. Normally, well, what happens before an election is you get a polling card, and that will indicate that you're on the register. And if you're used to getting that and you don't get a polling card, you should contact the ERO. But for young voters, we recognise that they're not used to getting the polling card, so we're considering that it might be better to write to them to say you are on the register, which I think is the point you're trying to make. So we have thought about that possibility.
But from memory, you don't need to have a polling card to go and vote.
No, but it does indicate to you that the election,
does indicate, yeah.
The election is happening, you're on the register.
Oh, indeed, absolutely.
And there's different ways of voting. Mm-hmm. And that's the three purposes of the polling card.
Right. Okay.
Sure, Linda?
Yeah, it was just a quick question, Mr Byrne. I was aware of you saying that you had been having discussions with the Cabinet Office. And I just wondered, from your point of view, whether you feel that there is cognisance of the importance of the referendum when they're dealing with the interface between the legislation down there and what we're achieving here.
Yes, they're very aware of it, and yeah, we find that we are responsive. They do understand.
Can I ask a general question about IT issues, because obviously you're very dependent upon IT in terms of the job you undertake, and you know, in producing the register. I wonder, therefore, are there any additional IT issues in addressing young voters, and if so, how are we going to address these?
We are very dependent on IT, and the software companies, there's a few software companies involved, and I understand all have been contacted by the Scottish Government officials about the likely process that would be involved. So they know what's going to be involved, and they have responded. So, but we've not seen any results of it, but we understand it's happening.
What are the issues from your perspective that we need to understand a bit more clearly?
Right.
If there are any there.
Well, we would have to have a database of names of people who are not on the register, but will go into a combined normal register and young persons register in time for the referendum. So there's one database, but it's in two streams, and those two streams will have to be combined at some stage.
That'll take programmers or individuals who've got the skills to be able to merge that.
Yes.
Okay, that shouldn't be in itself a difficulty, provided you've got enough time to do it. So.
Well, it's time for... They're quite specialist companies, yeah. And so they need time as well.
Yeah. Okay, you want to say more about what that means, that time, and what sort of time it might be? We might not be clear yet because we're not clear of exactly what's happening with the UK process. But.
Well, general rule, going back to Mr Gould, is that 6 months is a good time.
The general rule, it's a good rule, actually. Any other questions, folks, this morning? Beyond what we're talking about. Sorry, Annabel Golding, apologies. And then I'll go into more general questions.
Completely different issue, Convener. It's a specific matter of the 16 and 17-year-olds. Now, normally, once you've done your canvass and you find somebody who's going to become 18 in the forthcoming year, there's a date of birth goes in. But clearly there are areas of sensitivity if you're doing that with people who may be, 15 and 16 at that point. Because this is for a one election and a fixed date referendum, in your opinion, is it possible to include them without reference to their date of birth? Just note they will be 16.
I think we've suggested that in our response, and I think there's processes in mind for that. When we send out normal canvass forms and we put people on as young attainers, the advice we've had is that we shouldn't put the date of birth there. So what we put is date of birth known. Okay, so there's only a name in case it goes astray. And that would probably have to be the case with the young person's form as well. But the form itself tells you they are under 16.
Yeah, okay. And the second point is the question of disclosing addresses of these young attainers, because obviously there are young people subject to non-disclosure orders. I mean, there may be young people in care who are going to be eligible to vote, but for obvious reasons their whereabouts are not known to perhaps one or both parents. I mean, again, is it possible for arrangements to be made that in particular circumstances their address need not be disclosed.
I understand the draft legislation does cover that, and there is a process in normal registration for a declaration of connection with a property, which is normally for homeless.
Right.
But if they extend that into young people where they want the address not to be known, that's quite possible.
Linda?
Just, is it a different theme altogether?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, just general. I've got a couple of general questions, Convener. I'm aware that, and we're all aware that this process has already been gone through in other places like Jersey, like Isle of Man, etc. And I just wondered if there's been a learning process from their experiences.
To some extent, it's happened in Scotland already with the health board, as you're aware. It's slightly different in that the people in the health board elections were already 16 at time of registration. This goes a bit further to capture people who are 15 at time of registration. So there's childcare issues with that, but that's really the only major difference. Capturing 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds is pretty similar, except 16-year-olds are technically adults rather than 15-year-olds.
But you seem quite relaxed about the whole process. Would I be right in saying that?
We'll try to be as relaxed as possible.
I think EROs across the whole of Scotland meet regularly, and we do actually invite to those meetings the advisors, so the Electoral Commission, the Cabinet Office, Scottish Government, etc., all attend those meetings. So we are we have good dialogue, good communication between all parties. So I think we feel as if we have talked it round and are as ready as we can be to take on the legislation when it's enacted.
All 15 EROs in Scotland meet regularly. We use the Assessors Association for it because most are also assessors, but the ones who are not assessors are also involved and take full part.
But have you had any contact with the jurisdictions that Linda Fabian?
No, we've not had contact with Jersey or Isle of Man.
It's just that we intend to take evidence from them further down the line. Yeah. So it would perhaps be helpful to you if there was anything that you wish us to raise with them.
Yes, it would be interesting to see that.
Yeah. The other issue I had was about publication of the register and related to campaigning, etc., as per normal elections. I wondered if that was something we could tease out as well, Convener. Yeah, in terms of what Annabel Goldie was talking about confidentiality, etc., and it's very important. In terms of campaigning, do you see any differences in how registers will be able to be accessed and used by those who are campaigning?
I think from the draft legislation, it looks like the intention is to restrict access to the registers as much as possible until just before the referendum. Anybody who's on the register for the referendum will, by definition, be 16 on the day of the referendum. So the closer you get, the more 16-year-olds there will be on that register rather than 15-year-olds.
Stuart?
Thank you. It follows on from the discussion earlier on in terms of the information and the assistance that EROs will actually require. Now, we've already touched upon a few of them in terms of the kind of data records, in terms of the IT experts and software. But are there any other things or people or requirements that you would certainly need to make sure that you do capture as many people on the register as possible, but particularly the 15, 16 and 17-year-olds who will be voting for the first time?
I think if there's any doubt about capturing information on people under 16, we'd be happy if that doubt was removed, that we have the clear right to capture that information, so that education departments, for instance, couldn't say there's data protection issues. I think that.
I think the clear way to actually get people on the register would be a good publicity campaign, properly targeted at the right time to the right people. There's no point in trying to attract 16-year-olds onto the register if you're advertising at 1 o'clock in the day. So I think it does have to be timious. It has to be at the right time so that we're not keep writing out to them. And if they don't want to register, then you can't force them to register. But if the clear explanation is there, without, you might choose to vote at the end of the day. You're not thinking of voting now, but you can't do it if you're not on the register. And we need to keep putting this forward. And I think the Electoral Commission has taken on board the task of, or I think they've been given the task of, the main publicity working towards the referendum. And obviously the political parties have that as well. So the more we can get on, the better.
They certainly use various media platforms as compared to just newspapers and television. Yeah. Just kind of one other point just on that. I'm aware that in Norway that the voting is given to 16-year-olds. It was certainly for the 2011 local authority elections, and that was seen to be done as a kind of greater effort to get younger people actually involved. I don't know, I'd imagine the answer to this is going to be no, as a result of the questioning from Linda Fabiani earlier in terms of kind of JRs and games, etc. You've not contacted them, but have you contacted anyone else outside of these islands to find out what they've done and how they've done it?
Not yet, no, we haven't. And I know there's other countries like Austria who have introduced young persons voting. So we're aware of it, but we've not talked to anybody about the process. No.
Will you be doing so?
Now that we've brought it to mind, perhaps, yes.
Right, okay, thank you.
Linda Fabiani was investigating, and that is the register of the young voters. And my understanding is, according to the Section 8 of the current draft Referendum Franchise Bill, that is not to be published, but it may be disclosed to a person so far as necessary for the purpose of carrying out by that person of any function in connection with registration in the register. Now, is that meant to cover individual political parties or people registered with the Electoral Commission?
I think it's mainly to cover the returning officer, first of all, in order to organise the election, but political parties and, well, certainly the campaign groups would have access to the register at a certain point. And I would imagine political parties would as well.
It's just an important issue of perhaps political parties or other individuals needing to check the permissibility of donations, yes, for example.
Yes.
I don't see how you can do that unless you can see the register.
I understand that question has been raised, but
right,
it's probably a balance between the child protection issue and the clarity of who's registered. There'll be a balance there somewhere, which we will just have to follow. It's not something that we can decide. So.
Yeah, I know the Electoral Commission raised that, particularly that issue, and with the government, and obviously in the draft bill, and we'll see where the government respond to that in terms of the bill that comes in before us, because that's certainly been raised with them.
The thing we've mentioned is that the young persons register should be treated differently as regards open sale or sale to credit reference agencies, because it shouldn't be needed for that. It's only for the purposes of the referendum at the moment, so it should be restricted just to the political process.
I will go Ewing, sorry.
Yeah, just to go back to the issue I raised initially, and which John Houghton has just referred to in terms of what we need is a good publicity campaign. And I mean, I would have thought that also a route would be within the school itself via modern studies classes or citizenship classes, which every school has, that would be a good route to discuss particularly the registration process. And that would be quite in keeping, I would have thought, with the general duty of information that would entail.
Different EROs have different ways of doing that. Some get involved in modern studies classes. I think, Joan, you've got one council where you do that, and Renfrew are particularly to the fore in it. But we're all at different places with that. But I think for this referendum, we'll have to be more up to speed with it.
It would be great to see it on the curriculum as a specific item on the curriculum.
Well, of course, you've now got the medium of the Election Management Board, where that uniformity of practice and good practice sharing is we're more capable of achieving that now, and you would hope that through that medium and the discussion that goes on through it and your general discussions that you have as assessors in itself, that you can ensure that good practice was much more widespread throughout the country. just so folk behind could see that was a yes.
Yes, that was a yes. Sorry.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for attending the Scottish Parliament today. I'm very grateful for you giving us your time. So thank you, Joan, and thank you, Brian.
Okay.
Very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just give you a couple of moments to sort yourselves out before we move on to the next item. In that case, move on to agenda item 3, and this item provides us, the committee, with the opportunity to discuss the Deputy First Minister's reply to the committee in response to the letter we agreed that I would send to her about the timetable for scrutiny of the referendum bill itself. The paper sets out, in addition to the 2 original options which we had put forward, a third option, given a bit more flexibility, taking the stage 3 process into November. Certainly from a practical point of view, I can see merit in now adopting option 3 as the basis for planning at this stage. But I think we should have an understanding that in doing that, that doesn't stop us bringing the process in earlier if we think we can achieve that in terms of the whole way we go about it. But I'm sure there may be others with views, and that's the purpose of this. Stuart?
Thank you, Convener. I think certainly option 3 it provides the committee with that bit more flexibility in terms of timescales. So with that, I certainly would recommend that. The only thing I would encourage committee members, if possible, also it depends upon what actually comes down the line in terms of our debate in the coming months, but I do have a kind of a personal thing in terms of holding reports over a summer recess. So also in the draft one, proposal is to potentially, with this option, 27th of June, and then potentially finalise on the 5th of September. If we as a committee could sign it off either before or after, that would be kind of my preference. And the reason I'm saying that is because I've already said that on record in other committees in the Parliament with other reports. But apart from that, I think the option 3 provides the committee with a bit more flexibility.
Patrick? And then James.
I was on EET as well.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
I think it's a fair point. I think the difference is that, the report Stuart's talking about there was a very, very long inquiry into renewable energy. It wasn't scrutiny of a bill, and although there's probably more politics in this bill than there was in that inquiry, there's probably a slightly more straightforward substance, I think, in this one. So I don't think it would be a disaster if we had the timetable here that did stretch over the summer recess. It would be preferable if we could complete the stage 1 report before we break for recess. But I don't think it's worth dying in a ditch over.
I remember the last time we discussed this, I think there was a general agreement around, well, there was a discussion around the table that we didn't want to have both the referendum bill in the Parliament in the plenary session and the franchise bill in the Parliament in the plenary session in the last week. So that was what we've got before us avoids that. So, James.
Welcome the Cabinet Secretary's correspondence and indication that the timetable could be extended to November. I think yesterday's announcement from the Electoral Commission provides greater clarity, and the statements welcoming that report from the different campaign organisations and political parties I think makes the job of this committee a lot easier and takes a bit of the heat that there might have been out of the process. We obviously still have a proper job to do as a committee to interrogate the legislation, and I think option 3, gives a reasonable timetable for that. I absolutely accept that if we can accelerate it and bring things forward, then that's fair enough. I think in terms of Stuart's point about the stage 1 report, whereas it would be better to finish before the summer recess, I think we do have to bear in mind, as the convener said, that we've got the stage 3 of the franchise bill in the final week, so we don't want to be in a situation where we've got too much work crammed into the final week and we potentially take our eye off the ball. So I think option 3 is a reasonable one, and we build in flexibility if the timetable can be accelerated.
Honourable Goldie and then Honourable Ewing and then Richard.
Thank you, Convener. Can I too welcome the Cabinet Secretary's letter? I thought it was actually extremely helpful, and it seems to me that option 3 gives us both flexibility and also lets us keep a connection between the stage 1 report and the debate, because I think I am with Stuart McMillan that I don't like the hiatus between the report coming out and then a couple of months later there's a debate. So I think option 3 deals with that, but builds in flexibility. And I think the other thing we need to bear in mind is that James Kelly's correct. I think the Electoral Commission's pronouncements yesterday have clarified to some extent what we may anticipate to be content of the referendum bill. But listening to the evidence we've heard this morning, there may actually be some challenges arising for the franchise bill, and I think it might be the referendum bill could have to tweak a bit depending on what's happening and when. So I think this gives us a flexibility and a bit of comfort.
One thing I was certainly conscious of is, in mentioning if we can get it earlier, then the better. This committee might, as James has alluded to, we've got a job to do here in scrutinising this legislation. We might suggest things to the government that require secondary legislation and regulation. And if it's not that October date and it's a September date, and the bill has to be passed, really needs to be passed quite cleanly by through royal assent by the end of the year, to give the time to get these regulations through before the 6-month rule kicks in. So that's why I think we need to be very acutely aware of that. The government might not at this stage have, well, I don't know, they might have regulation, they might not, but we might suggest stuff that they need to take on board. So. Honourable Ewing and then Richard.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree really with the thrust of what other colleagues have said. I think option 3, and well done to the clerks for coming up with the suggested process in terms of timetable. I think that works. I would make 2 points. One, I echoing just what the convener has said there about the possibility, at least, of any further secondary legislation. We really need to, the mid-November date has to be the absolute cut-off, in my view, because there is an expectation that we will do our job properly and within due time to allow other things to happen at the right time as well. And the other point I would make in that respect is, of course, that and a point I made last week, that the suggestion is already we have consecutive meetings potentially. We can meet earlier. I'm sure we can find the will to do what we need to do.
Richard, then Patrick.
You may have discussed this previously, Convener, but is there any clarity now on the date for the publication of the white paper, and does that require to be taken into consideration at all when looking at your work programme?
Well, that's associated legislation, I think, is the word that's attached to a remit. So it's not actually legislation, Richard, I don't think, in terms of its nature.
There may be issues coming out, though there may.
Well, there may be.
But just as a question.
Yeah, I don't know any more about the timing than you folks know in terms of what's already been put out in the media. So. Patrick.
A related point that I was going to raise. First of all, does our remit cover the orders that are already being talked about in paragraph 4 of this note, or does our remit at the moment only cover the bills themselves?
It says the remit covers associated legislation, so our remit, we would have to reconvene to...
We might at some point consider whether we would seek the Parliament's consent to broaden the remit to look at perhaps other aspects of the government's work in relation to the referendum, and whether we wanted to take evidence on that. There may be things which are not formally legislation, which are out with our current written remit, that we might think there's a continued role for the committee in parliamentary scrutiny.
Let's come back and look at that later, but let's get the job we've been set up to do done first in terms of making sure this legislation is fit for purpose. That's the job Parliament set us, so we can always, further down the track, examine whether or not we want to consider wider issues than just the legislation itself. Okay, any other comments? And in that case, I'm very grateful to members. We've already agreed that we'll have government officials come and give us an informal briefing on the 28th. The next meeting is scheduled for the 7th of February. Yes, of February. I know the paper does say January, but that's why intentionally I said February, Mr Gibson, sir. And on the 7th of February, we will be meeting, we'll continue the Stage 1 oral evidence session by video conference on the franchise bill from Michael Delahaye from Jersey and Paul Whitfield from Guernsey. So I look forward to seeing you on that occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience.